Hello everyone, today we will talk about interview again. This is the second part of lecture on interview. First, let's talk about how many types of interviews are out there. The first type is structured interview, which means you will have a list of questions you want to ask, and most of the questions will be close-ended questions. People just answer yes or no to your question. And this type of interview is not very common. What's more frequently done would be the second type, open-ended, unstructured interview. It's very close to the format you see on TV most of the time. It's an open situation, and usually the interviewer can decide where the direction would go. Depends on what the interviewees are talking about in the interview. So there will be more flexibility, and the interviewers can decide whether to follow up on certain questions or not. But when we're talking about interview as a qualitative data collection method in the research setting, the last kind will be the most frequently done one, and that's the one you will do for this class as well. It's a semi-structured interview. It's a more flexible version of the structured one, which means you will have a lot of open-ended questions. Actually, if you want to have a good interview, you should have more open-ended questions than closed-ended questions. And you should have a checklist. It's what we call a protocol. You will develop a protocol for this class and have a checklist. You want to ask the same questions every interview you conduct. If you have a research topic in mind, let's say if you want to study the effect of social media on individuals' mental health, you decided to interview 12 people, then you should have a basic checklist that you use for every interview. Even though the answers you get may not be the same, but you want the answer to be comparable, so you want to ask the same question during every interview. And that's what you will work on for this class as well. Of course, interview doesn't have to be face-to-face. You can have someone answer your questions over the phone or use Skype. There's so many methods you can use now. And it really allows you to reach out to people who are far away from you. Like personal interviews, you can have more personal contact during phone interview rather than a survey. Of course, you can always send someone the list of questions, ask them to type their answer out. But that will not work as well as a phone interview because you don't have the interaction between the interviewee and the interviewer. And that's sometimes very important to the research itself. Of course, there are disadvantages as well. People don't really like to talk for a long time on the phone. Usually a face-to-face interview can last easily over an hour. But if you have a phone interview over an hour, people get frustrated in the end. And when your interviewees are answering questions on the phone, you don't really have a control over the environment. They may be distracted and they may have other businesses they have to take care of. So those are all the things you need to take into consideration when you decide whether you want to conduct a phone interview or face-to-face interview. And even though we say that a phone interview can save you some time if that person is far away, but many people don't have their phone number publicly listed. So you have to figure out how to reach that person as well. It's not a cost-free method to do research, but it does give you more flexibility if you want to do interview with people who are far away. We talked about this last week a little bit, that training of interviewers can be really, really important because interviewers can control the quality of the result. And also, you need to know what's going on before you start the research, before you start to ask people questions. So you really need to rehearse the process and understand why you're asking those questions and why the order matters. And while you're doing the training, it depends who is doing the interview, who will be the interviewer, because sometimes research is done by a team. Someone is good at doing interview, someone is good at transcribing things, someone is good at analyzing the data, someone is good at writing the paper. So you need to decide who on this team will be the interviewer and let that person describe the entire study. And they need to know more than the skill of having a good conversation, which is what we covered last week. They really need to know the research itself to be an effective interviewer. And this can be overlooked sometimes, that interviewer should also know the sampling logic and the process. Let's say if you want to study social media, again, that's our topic for this class. You need to decide whether you want to study college student or older generation or stay-home mom or very busy professionals. I'm sure they have different habits when it comes to using social media and different preferences, to be honest. So the interviewer himself or herself should know the sampling logic, why you are talking to those people, why they're so unique, and be genuinely interested in those people's experience. That's part of the training as well. An interviewer should know that his or her bias really can bias the result as well. And it's not an easy thing to do, that hold back your own personal opinion when you have a strong belief about something. But it's very, very important that you are interested in other people's answer. You are not entering an interview hoping to persuade someone. That's not what an interview is for. Even though you do see this on TV a lot, sometimes a talk show host would try to convince the guest that his or her opinion was actually wrong, he or her should do something differently. That's for the dramatic effect of TV shows. That's not how we do an interview in research settings. While we're doing research, we are always trying to be objective and trying to be bias-free as much as possible. So when we're doing the training or when we're trying to pick an interviewer from the research team, keep that in mind. You want to have someone who is friendly, open-minded, and really knows what the research is about. And when you're prepared for interview, there are so many things you need to consider. To start with, you want an environment that's quiet, comfortable, that won't have much distraction for the whole conversation. You don't want to have kids running around in the house while interviewing a mom. You also don't want party next door when you're interviewing some family either. So choose a setting that's with the least distraction, but also keep the participants or your interviewees comfortable. You don't want to bring them into a very quiet lab in the basement of the library. They won't be comfortable. After you have a place set up, when they come for the interview, you need to explain the purpose of the interview and address terms of confidentiality. In other words, tell them that whatever they say will stay anonymous and you won't share the result with anyone other than people on the research team. And of course, you will report the result eventually, but the result will be common theme. It won't be person A said blah, blah, blah. That's not how research is done. And no one should be able to identify the identity of your participants just by reading your paper. And also explain the format of the interview. Tell them that what they need to do. If you want them to elaborate, if you want them to talk, let them know you expect them to talk. If you just want them to give you a short, very brief answer, let them know as well. And sometimes we will do activities during interview, let them fill a sheet or let them watch something. If you're going to do that, explain that in the beginning will really help the process. So nothing will surprise them. So they will be more comfortable to talk to you. And also tell them how long the interview usually takes. It's not uncommon that the interview will take longer than you expected or shorter than you expected, but still give people expected timeline so they know they don't need to rush, or if they need to rush, they don't have enough time to do the interview. You can know that before you start. You don't want to find out that your interviewees can stay in the middle of the interview. Then you can't really use that result because it's not a complete interview. And you want to provide your contact information or whoever is in charge of this research team. Make sure that if the interviewees change their mind, they don't want you to use their result, or if they think about something else, they want to clarify their answer, they have a way to contact you. So it's really important you leave that contact information. And always allow your participants, allow your interviewees to clarify any doubts about the interview. Let them ask questions. And prepare a method of recording data. What I always recommend would be use multiple devices. Usually it's your phone and your research team members' phones to record the whole conversation. At the same time, take notes on nonverbal cues. If someone is shaking their head or nodding, it won't show up in the video. It won't show up in the audio recording. So you want to take notes as well. But of course, if your interviewees are comfortable enough, have a video recording can be really helpful as well. So you can always go back. But please keep in mind that taking notes of what's happening can be helpful, but you should always take notes on your own thoughts as well. Because when we're in the conversation, we may not have time to reflect on what has happened. So I really recommend leave some small notes there to remind yourself, come back here, ask this person to clarify later. So don't let your thoughts go missing just because you didn't take enough notes. And it's always helpful if you have multiple note takers, but that can make the interviewees uncomfortable as well. So it's really a balanced act, and you have to figure out the comfort method to do interview between you and your interviewees as well. How do we know someone is a good interviewer? That person should be knowledgeable, really know super well, know everyone on the research team well, know the research design, know the sampling procedure, and can speak to people comfortably. You don't want to have someone super shy and super nervous to conduct an interview. And you want this person to be gentle. This is really, really important. This person is open-minded and sensitive and patient to other people, even when the other people may be rude or not polite or even saying things that's outrageous. It's very important. If you pay attention to TV show, you will realize the good talk shows, the hosts are always gentle. It doesn't matter how unbelievable the guests are. They are always patient and open-minded. And this person should also have the power to control the conversation. You can't just let the interviewees take over, say whatever they want to say, because you have a purpose for your research here. And this person should also be critical. When the interviewer realizes something the interviewees was saying may not be true, you have to be able to ask them to clarify or provide backup evidence or elaborate more. This is very important as well. And if you want to keep information about the subject, you can always have a note taker there with the interviewer, and provide interpretation can happen during the interview or even after. So that's not as important as the knowledgeable, gentle, and steering and critical criteria. And there are different types of topics that you can ask. You want to know their behavior, what they're doing, their opinions, what they think about it, how they feel, how much they know about the facts, and what kind of senses they use to understand the situation. And of course, you always need background and demographic information. It doesn't matter which type of topic you have. It's always good to know where this person come from. And the order of the questionnaire should be logical as well. You need to involve them, but you don't want to start with something really controversial. They may not be comfortable enough to talk to you yet. So start with something simple. Start with facts, and then talk about opinions and feelings later. And the last question should always be, do you have more to say? And do you have any questions? Do you want to clarify? Let them add anything they want to add. Stages of interview investigation is not as important, because once you have the protocol, everything is written on the paper. You don't have to remember this part. This is more like a checklist when you're doing research. You want to know what you want to do, what type of investigation you want to conduct, and design a research, interview the people, and transcribe the recording, analyze the data, and verify the findings, and write a paper about it. And while you are doing the interview, just again, let me remind you, have multiple tape recorders there. Ask one question at a time and encourage responses. If you have a good interviewer, those will be taken care of automatically. And last but not the least, after the interview, verify if the tape recorder worked and make as much notes as possible. And right after the interview, like within 10 minutes, write down your observations and write down the things you want to talk about in your paper eventually, because that's when your memory is fresh. Okay, that's all I have today. Please do the readings, and I will talk to you next week.